Welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to have you. And if you're returning, welcome back. I'm so excited to see your pretty face again. I try to post at least once a week. This hasn't been happening recently because I've been very busy at work, but I am trying to post at least once a week a new true crime story. And then on occasion, I will post on a Saturday. On Saturdays, it's more of a strange history, or I want to get into conspiracy theories or ghost stories or something like that. So if that's something you might be interested in, you can go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below and hit the bell icon so you can be notified when I upload. Only if you want to though, no pressure. I do want to give a quick warning that the nature of some of these topics that we discuss can be pretty heavy. So if that's something your mental health cannot handle, just please do me a favor and click off this video. You can catch me somewhere else, but your mental health will always be so much more important than any YouTube video ever will be. I do also want to give another just warning that the people that we talk about, there are still people that are affected by these cases and that still have to live with the consequences of this person's decision. So always remember to remain respectful in the comments and yeah, these are real people. I know a lot of times it can be so easy to kind of remove yourself from the story and just look at it as a story, but these aren't just stories. These are real events that happen to real people. So please just keep that in mind as we go forward. Today's case is very tragic. We are going to be talking about a family annihilator. So that's your major trigger warning that if that's something that you cannot handle, just once again, click off the video and I will catch you somewhere else on another video. But this is Chris Coleman. Chris was born on March 20th of 1977 in Monroe County, Illinois. He was the youngest of 3 children. His parents were Ron and Connie Coleman, and they were very religious. Chris and his brothers grew up going to church, spending a lot of hours in church, and were very worried about their religious health, I guess you could say. Connie and Ron taught their children very conservative Christian values, and this is something that Chris took into adulthood. There was one time when he was a teenager where he got drunk with his friends and the guilt was eating him alive, so much so that he went to his coach and confessed to everything. This kid was dedicated to his faith just like his parents had brought him up. Chris was described as more quiet than his brothers and more sensitive, a little bit more reserved. If he and his brothers and their dad would go hunting, he would be the guy that wasn't able to watch what was happening. He didn't like to hunt, so it really came as a surprise to his family when he decided to join the Marines right out of high school. Chris would become a part of the military police and he would become a dog handler, and that's actually how he met his future wife, Sherry Weiss. In 1997, he had gone to a dog handling training conference of some kind, and that's actually where he met Sherry. Sherry was born on July 3rd of 1977. She was born into a very stable and loving home, but she was a devout Catholic, and this is going to be important later. As soon as they met, Sherry and Chris hit it off and began dating very quickly. This was a relationship that Chris hid from his parents, and it kind of seems like maybe it was because Sherry was a Catholic and not a born-again Christian or an evangelist the way Chris was. In August of 1977, Chris would bring Sherry to his parents' home, but he told his parents that this was just a friend that he was giving a ride to. He wouldn't tell them that they were actually in a relationship, and it wasn't until a little bit later that Chris called his parents and told them that he and Sherry had actually gotten married. This came out of the blue. His parents didn't even know that he was dating Sherry, and now all of a sudden he's married. And very quickly after this announcement, Chris let his family know that Sherry was actually pregnant. So it became clear that Sherry and Chris actually got married because Sherry was pregnant. And if you were born into the religion, you know that premarital sex is not something that is people don't like premarital sex in the evangelical religion. And so if someone does get pregnant before they're married, it is often highly encouraged that the couple do get married. Now, Sherry would leave the Catholic faith and she would become a born-again evangelist, but Chris's parents never fully accepted Sherry. In fact, it seems like they blamed Sherry for Chris's premarital sex, saying that she was probably the one that had pressured him into doing it because, of course, their sweet baby angel could do no wrong. Connie and Ron would also go on to say say that Chris showed immediate signs of regretting this marriage. They said that Chris really knew that this was not right for him, and he was immediately remorseful of marrying Sherry. Sherry and Chris welcomed a beautiful baby boy into the world in April of 1998. His name was Garrett Coleman, and 2 years later in 2000, they would welcome another boy into the world, and his name was Gavin. I think I forgot to mention this earlier, but Sherry was also in the military when she and Chris met. She was in the Air Force, and that's actually how they met. It was kind of like a military training of some kind, and both Sherry and Chris decided to leave the military in order to take care of their children. Sherry opted to become a stay-at-home mom so she could be more hands-on with her children, while Chris was looking for full-time employment. Since Chris had grown up so dedicated to his faith, he and his family had often attended Joyce Meyer conferences. Now, again, if you are part of any kind of religious group, especially the evangelical group or the born-again Christian religion, then you will know exactly who Joyce Meyer is. For those of you who don't, I'll explain it. She is a multi-millionaire, like, televangelist. So she's on TV a lot. She's written several books about religion and how to grow in your faith, and she is worth a couple of $1 million. Like, this woman is no joke. She is very wealthy, and she flies all across the world spreading the gospel. Their family went to Joyce's conferences so much that they actually got to know Joyce on a more of a personal level. And when Chris was looking for a job after he had left the military, there was actually a position open in Joyce Meyer's security group, and she gave Chris the job. So he was able to kind of walk into the security position for Joyce Meyer. Joyce Meyer's business is based in St. Louis. So Chris and Sherry opted to move to Columbia, Illinois, really close to St. Louis. So Chris would be really close to his job while they were still across the border in Illinois. Chris was making over $100,000 a year. That's a really, really good sum of money. And so they were pretty financially well off. Sherry was able to stay home with her children, no problem, and Chris was able to go work and provide a nice home and everything that the family really needed. Garrett and Gavin were growing up to be excellent kids. They were super involved in all kinds of activities, mostly sports. They were really outgoing and beautiful children, and Sherry really loved being a mother. She was a doting mother. She enjoyed attending all of their events, and she just liked to spoil them to death. And this would actually become a point of contention between the couple. Sherry was more, from what I could understand, Sherry was a little bit more laid back when it came to her parenting, while Chris was more of an authoritarian. He really liked to put the hammer down and expected a lot from his children. This would result in several arguments between the couple because different parenting styles, like, it really can do a lot of damage to a couple. On top of that, Sherry liked to spend money quite a bit, and this was also something that the couple argued about. Again, financial issues is one of those things that couples really will argue about quite frequently, and Sherry liked to spend a little bit of money, and Chris really did not appreciate this. He was often upset at the fact that he had to drive an older model vehicle, and this just really seemed to upset him. After Chris had accepted the job with Joyce Meyer, he really seemed to change. He shaved his head and told Sherry that the reason he did this was because it made him look tougher, and he just started getting really cocky. We all know this guy, not a person I like to hang around with, but just that guy. We all know that guy. But in 2008, things really seemed to get worse. Sherry started suspecting Chris of having an affair. Sherry had a best friend in high school. Her name was Tara Lentz. Many of Sherry and Tara's friends thought that Tara had always been kind of jealous of Sherry because Sherry grew up in a very stable and loving home, and this was something that was lacking in Tara's life. And a lot of their friends really felt like Tara was jealous of Sherry and what she had in life. Sherry had introduced Chris and Tara at an event, or they had, either way, Sherry had introduced Chris and Tara, and they seemed to hit it off absolutely immediately. Chris was gone a lot for work, which is another thing that was hard on the couple, is Chris had to travel with Joyce Meyer when she had conferences around the world, so he would be gone often. One of those conferences was in Florida, and that's where Tara lived. While Chris was working in Florida with Joyce Meyer, he had met up with Tara, and this is when the affair apparently started. And Chris wasn't very good at hiding this affair. As soon as it started, Chris began to change as a person. Chris was someone who would very rarely drink. He never cussed, and as soon as he started seeing Tara, he would drink more, and he would throw cuss words around more so than he had been before. And all of these things were not lost on Sherry. She knew that something was up. In fact, in 2008, she even told a friend, "Do you want to see the woman that my husband is having an affair with?" And she pulled up a picture of Tara. So it really seems like Sherry knew that this affair was going on, but she really did not want to break up her family. She wanted things to work out with Chris so that their kids could have both mom and dad in the picture. And she really worked hard at making the marriage work. Chris, on the other hand, was more focused on being as mean to Sherry as possible. The thing is, in the evangelical Christian movement, divorce is severely frowned upon. In these kinds of groups, once you are married, they view it as a blessing from God or like a covenant to God or whatever. They really look at it as in you need to stay married for the rest of your lives. Otherwise, it is a broken promise to God. On top of that, Chris was working for a very religious woman, and he thought that if he divorced Sherry, that he might lose his job. But in his mind, he thought that if Sherry would divorce him, then he would still be able to keep his job, because then he could walk away looking like the person that had tried to make it work but didn't. So he started being really mean to Sherry for no reason. He was just awful to her. But Sherry was persistent. She wanted to make this work for her children. Later that same year in 2008, things would get a lot more difficult for the couple as Chris started receiving emails that were very threatening to not only his life, but the life of his children and his wife. These emails were coming from an email address, destroychris@gmail.com. In the emails, there were things like, "Stop preaching this bull," or "Chris and his family will die." There were multiple emails that would come in under this email address, and they were all directed at Chris. The thing is that there were no other security team members that were receiving these emails, and Joyce Myers herself had received these emails before, but she was the one preaching, so it kind of seems like she would be the target of these kinds of attacks. It really doesn't make sense that Chris would be the target of these attacks, but he was receiving these emails. But the threats went further, and they were even hand delivered to the family's mailbox that was right outside their home. This is obviously alarming if you receive threats in your home or outside of your home, or if you're even receiving threats to your children's lives or your wives' lives. Like, you're going to bring attention to this, and Chris did that. He brought attention to this whole situation to Joyce Meyer, and then he had a neighbor who was also a detective for the Columbia Police Department.
He told me that he had gotten an email threatening his family if he did not stop working for me. And then he told me that somebody started putting these threats in his mailbox, at which point I think he became more concerned about them, since that meant somebody knew where he lived. He told me that they had taken the information to the police.
As luck would have it, the detective that was Chris and Sherry's neighbor had a video camera that he decided to point directly at Chris and Sherry's mailbox in hopes of finding whoever had put these threats into the mailbox. But as you've probably already guessed, as soon as this camera went up, the threats stopped completely. They did not receive another threat in their home. So you would think that things were kind of settling down at this point and that the threats were kind of stopping. On May 5th of 2009, at about 6:43 in the morning, Chris calls his detective neighbor. His name was Justin Barlow, and he says that he's having trouble reaching Sherry, and he wondered if this detective could go in and do a welfare check on his family. Justin immediately gets dressed and walks over to the Coleman house. Chris says that he's about 5 minutes away, but he just wants to make sure that his family is okay. He says he has been texting Sherry and she hasn't responded, and he's just really worried about their safety. When Justin walks into the house to do this welfare check, he immediately smells spray paint. Moving into the house, he sees graffiti spray painted all over the walls in almost every single part of the house. And this immediately is kind of nerve-wracking, but on top of that, the entire house is dead quiet. At this point, Sherry would have been up getting the kids ready and getting ready for the day, and the house was completely quiet. As he made his way further into the house, he soon found the bodies of Sherry, Gavin, and Garrett. They had all been strangled, and they had all sadly passed away. Chris made it home just a few minutes after the discovery was made. Police, emergency responders, everyone responds, and instead of trying to get in the house to see his family, Chris just goes and sits on the porch and puts his head in his hands. Now, we don't know how we would react in a situation like that, so this could be completely normal, but it does make some detectives question Chris a little bit. One of the emergency responders was a little bit worried about how Chris was reacting, so he took him to the back of the ambulance and sat him down on a gurney. The police chaplain was there, and he went to go speak with Chris, and he noticed that Chris had several scratches on his arms, and the chaplain asked where those scratches had come from, and Chris starts punching the gurney. He then tells the chaplain that he thinks that the scratches came from him punching the gurney, even though he hadn't punched the gurney before then. Chris was obviously taken in for an interview. During the interview, he tells the detectives that it's really cold in there, and he asks for a blanket. Police do give him this blanket, and he only covers up his arms, but the cops had already seen the scratches on his arms, so they were going to ask him about it, but they start at where this all began. Chris says that he left at about 5:45 in the morning to go to the gym. Shortly into his workout, he's texting Sherry, asking her if she's up yet or if she's got the kids up and, getting ready for the day. Sherry doesn't respond to these text messages. At first, Chris says that he wasn't that concerned because he thought maybe she was in the shower and just hadn't seen the text messages, but as time went on, he grew more and more concerned because it wasn't like Sherry to not respond to his text messages.
Well, I set my alarm clock for 5:30 and I used my phone for my alarm clock. And got up at 5:30, went in the bathroom, put these clothes here on, and drove off. I got to where I was at, but called Sherry to wake her up, get her going, and she didn't answer, of course. And so I went home to the gym, to Gold's gym. Started working out. I text her at some point. I might even have called her again. I don't remember. I could probably look at my phone if you want me to.
Did you guys have a home phone number too, or just cell phones?
We just used cell phones. So I texted her, and then she still didn't respond.
He then says that he was worried about the threats that he had been receiving, and he thought that maybe something had happened to Sherry and his kids, and that's why he asked for the detective to go in and do a welfare check. And looking for evidence any piece of evidence that they can find, and they do notice that the spray paint that was used in the house was a candy apple red. So they ask Chris if he has any spray paint in his home, to which he replies no, he does not. Autopsies were performed on Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin, and there they found some very interesting things. The medical examiner believes that Gavin and Garrett and Sherry had not died around 6 in the morning. There were several things that they could tell, like rigor mortis, and the color of their skin kind of really gives away that time of death, and the medical examiner did not believe that the time of death was at 6 in the morning. It was more like 3 in the morning. Chris was asked about this, and he said that Sherry had been laying next to him alive as far as he knew when he left for the gym at about 5:45 in the morning. A memorial service was done for Sherry, Garrett, and Gavin, and Chris did not attend this, which was very weird, and it kind of struck the investigators as weird as well. They also soon got tips in that as soon as this memorial service was done, there had been a memorial, or people were bringing flowers and teddy bears and cards and stuff like that for the victims, and placing them in front of the Coleman house. As soon as this memorial was over, Chris took all of that down. He took all of it down, moved it, and got rid of it, which is really weird behavior since considering that his family was just brutally murdered in his own home. Investigators found something very interesting in the home. They found a receipt for spray paint that was the exact color used on the graffiti inside the house. They could tie this receipt to Chris and Chris buying it with credit card because Chris bought it with a credit card. So he was questioned as to why he had the exact same spray paint and that he had just bought it a couple of days prior. Chris had said that he did not have any spray paint in the house and he didn't know anything about it. Chris was then also questioned about the affair with Tara. He did tell investigators that he and Tara were really good friends, but there had never been an affair and they were not in a relationship at all. But what Chris didn't know is that investigators all the way in Florida were already interviewing Tara and she had admitted to everything. Tara told investigators that Chris was actually getting ready to serve Sherry divorce papers the same day that she died. This affair was more than just an affair. Not only were Tara and Chris saying that they loved each other, they were planning on getting married. Tara was already looking for homes to buy in the St. Louis area so that she and Chris could move in together. They were picking out baby names. They had bought promise rings for each other. Chris and Sherry had planned a Disney vacation, and Chris had, behind Tara's back, canceled everything and had booked a cruise with Tara instead that was coming up in the future. I mean, this affair was not just a little affair. They were not just friends like Chris tried to play it off. This was a full-blown affair, and Chris was 100% planning on leaving Sherry in order to be with Tara. But the entire kicker to this investigation is that police were able to trace the IP address of those threatening emails that Chris had been receiving before all of this happened, and the IP address matched Chris's IP address. So Chris was sending these threatening emails to himself the entire time. Chris was arrested on May 19th of 2005, so just a couple of days after the murders took place. He was adamant that he was innocent of what he was being accused of. Joyce Meyer was actually called to testify in his trial, and she was asked if Chris would have lost his job had he divorced Sherry. Joyce Meyer did go on the stand and say that it was not like an automatic qualification to be fired if he divorced Sherry, or that she looked at every situation case by case. She did kind of imply that it was a good possibility that he might have lost his job, but it wasn't a necessary, she didn't say that he would have automatically lost his job had he divorced Sherry.
Each situation is handled totally separately based on the circumstances. We have many people that work for us that have been divorced, and a person is not necessarily, do they lose their job because they get a divorce. It wouldn't have been the divorce so much as the immorality.
So for instance, if a person in your employment, if their spouse filed for divorce against them, and perhaps they had little control over that, you might leave them in your employment. That's a possibility.
Certainly.
Okay, and on the other end of the spectrum, if a person was having an adulterous affair and then filed for divorce from their spouse to be with that person, then their employment may have been terminated.
May have been, yes.
Chris's parents were at his side the entire time. They really kind of tried to play Sherry as the bad person in the entire situation, and they were just completely on Chris's side the entire time that this was going on. Chris's father said that they had actually bought the spray paint to make targets for the kids, and that Chris had not bought it specifically for this. So it almost seems to me like Chris's parents were willing to lie to cover for their son, which makes absolutely no sense to me, considering that you are claiming to be Christians, you are claiming to be lovers of Jesus, and yet you will try to dismiss your son murdering his entire family in order to help him go free. You're willing to look the other way at an affair that he is having, but you're not willing to look past the fact that he and Sherry had a child out of wedlock. This really rubs me the wrong way, and I'm sure you all will understand exactly why. As the trial was given to the jury for deliberation, the jury was kind of fighting back and forth, but they were able to find a picture from October of 2008 where it showed Chris and Tara kissing, and so that really kind of solidified the whole affair, and with all the other evidence, Chris was found guilty. So, being found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, Chris was sentenced to 3 life sentences with no possibility of parole. Chris did try appealing, and all of this was rejected until March of 2019 when he was finally granted a new trial due to ineffective counsel. Nothing really came of this until July of 2020 when a judge finally threw out his new trial and said that that was not going to happen. But really, that brings me to the end of this case. That's all I have for you today. I'm really curious as to what your thoughts are on this. Do you think that Chris is guilty, or do you think he is innocent of what he's been convicted of? I personally think he's guilty, 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 guilty. I think he did it because he didn't want to lose his job. He didn't want to be seen as the Christian that divorces his wife, and I think he wanted to be with Tara. That's just personally my opinion on the whole thing, but I would love to know your thoughts down in the comments. Like I said, please remember that these are real people, and a lot of these people are still alive today, and this case is still affecting them every single day. 3 beautiful souls were lost in all of this, and 2 children who never got to grow up and experience life to the fullest. And I think that is such a tragedy, and just, they deserve so much better. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Here is another reminder to subscribe if this is something that you're interested in. If not, totally fine. I'll catch you somewhere else. But for now, I am sending you so much love. I hope this finds you so well, and I will see you next week.